Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a world behind rice paper walls and polished wooden floors, where silence is prized and eye contact can be a power play. You're not a warrior tonight, but you're married to one, or at least born into the same polished, high-pressure social system. Welcome to the delicate, layered, often suffocating world of sex, marriage, and quiet rebellion for samurai women. Oh, and spoiler, you probably won't survive this. Not because of swords, although, yeah, there's always a katana within reach, but because being born female in feudal Japan is basically a lifelong test in endurance, obedience, and subtext. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop your city and time in the comments. I always love seeing where and when you're listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're born into a samurai household, not the fancy castle-level type, but a respectable middle-ranking family. Your father has retainers, land, and his own room for tea ceremonies. Your mother bows deeply when he enters, and you learn early that silence is safer than wit, and humility more powerful than beauty. You're a girl, and that fact is both a blessing and a curse. No one expects you to carry a sword, but everyone expects you to carry the family's honor on your back between your legs in your uterus. No pressure. From the moment you can speak, you're told how to behave. Keep your eyes low, hands folded, voice soft, and emotions quieter than falling cherry blossoms. You're taught to walk without sound, smile without teeth, and never ever betray hunger for food or anything else. You watch your mother perform every interaction with your father like a choreographed dance, not because she's weak, but because that dance is the only kind of power she's allowed to have. You learn to read and write, which is a privilege, but don't mistake it for freedom. You're not reading romance or philosophy. No, you copy Buddhist scriptures, trace moral poems, and memorize etiquette Tatasu scrolls. One day, you carefully brush out a passage about the 3 obediences, to your father before marriage, to your husband after, and to your son if widowed. You are never your own master. It's a fact so woven into the air you breathe that even questioning it feels like a sin. Outside, your brothers spar with bokken swords in the courtyard. Inside, you learn the proper angle for bowing when greeting a daimyo's wife. You train with a naginata, but not for glory. It's for protecting your virtue if your castle falls. That's the word they use, virtue. It means the fragile thing between your legs, and the even more fragile thing between your ears, your reputation, but you're not stupid. By the time you're 10, you've already figured out that sex, though never named out loud, is everywhere. It clings to the way maids whisper behind fans, to the hidden illustrations tucked into the bottom of your uncle's bookshelf, and to the barely there glances exchanged across low tables during sake-heavy dinners. You hear the rustle of robes late at night. You hear your mother crying once, muffled behind a door. You ask no questions. That's what you're trained to do. See everything, say nothing. There's a ceremony when you get your first period. Not a party, definitely not a party. More like a hushed congratulations and an increase in how many layers you're expected to wear. Your baths become supervised. You stop being a child in everyone's eyes, even if you still dream about dragons and write bad poetry. Suddenly, you're a future wife, and future wives are investments, not people. Your father and mother begin to speak more quietly when you're near. Guests begin to look at you too long. You're measured like a horse, for posture, for poise, for skin tone, and the softness of your voice. No one asks what you want. Everyone asks what you're worth. Honor is everything. You could have the face of a moon goddess and the voice of a biwa player. But if anyone even suspects you've been spoiled, your entire family will suffer. So your body becomes a national security concern, your movements are monitored, your conversations filtered, your future micromanaged down to the day. Meanwhile, you start to notice how the married women act. Some are stiff and cold, others warm and subtly bitter. They complain of headaches a lot. They spend time in the garden. They avoid their husbands until duty calls. You ask one once, quietly, too quietly, if being a wife is fun. She smiles like a cracked teacup and changes the subject to the flower arranging. One night you're lying awake under your futon listening to rain tap the roof like ghost footsteps. And it dawns on you. Sex isn't about love, not here. Not in this house, not in this era. It's about legacy. It's about alliances. It's about control. It's a transaction wrapped in silks and rituals. You don't feel fear exactly, but you feel something close, like the quiet before a battle you never agreed to fight. But here's the twisted thing. Even in this strict world, women like you learn to wield their own kind of power. You'll see it in the way your mother gets her way with a single raised eyebrow. You'll see it when a widow uses her late husband's name to control his lands. You'll even see it in the courtesans in the city, who, though sold, can read 10 languages and play every man in the room like a koto string. For now, though, you stay still. You sip your tea, you memorize the scrolls, you avoid the gaze of visiting samurai, and you wait. Because soon, the talk of marriage will begin, and once that door opens, there's no walking back through it. It starts quietly, like everything else in your life, a whisper between your parents behind closed doors, a longer than usual visit from your uncle, whose eyes linger on you just enough to make your stomach twist. Then your mother calls you in for tea, not the ordinary kind, but the formal kind where every gesture is timed, and you're expected to pretend you're not being evaluated like a lacquer box. She doesn't say much, she never does, but her tone is smooth and careful, and you know by the weight in her voice that something is happening. You're 14 now, which means you're technically ready. Not biologically, your hips are still narrow, and your arms still too thin to carry a baby, let alone raise one. But socially, politically, matrimonially, there's nothing scandalous about marrying at your age. In fact, you're a bit late for some families. Girls in the provinces get betrothed as soon as they bleed. But your family has ambitions. They've waited for the right match. The next day, you're summoned to the veranda to serve tea. The man waiting there is older than your father. His hair is thinning and he laughs through his nose. His face is wide and calm, but there's a sharpness behind his eyes, like he's calculating the cost of your dowry just by watching how you pour. You don't speak. You bow low, your knees barely feeling the tatami. Your father watches your posture like a hawk. You feel the man watching too, not with lust, no, not yet, but with the hunger of someone shopping for a very expensive horse. Turns out he's not the one. He's a messenger, a go-between, and a kodo. The real groom isn't here. He never will be, not until it's all arranged. The land contracts, the bridal gifts, the agreements signed in ink and sealed with crimson. Love isn't part of this discussion. Neither is attraction. What matters is how many cuckoo of rice your father will give and how many retainers your future husband commands. You, in this entire transaction, are more symbol than human, a bundle of virtues, womb included. Over the next few weeks, things change. You're told to spend more time with the biwa instructor. You're discouraged from going outside. Sun-darkened skin won't help your appeal. You're no longer allowed to help with chores that might give you calluses. Instead, you sit in the garden trimming bonsai trees and pretending you're not being polished like a jewel for some distant man you've never met. Your mother becomes more attentive in her quiet way. She teaches you how to fold robes with grace, how to mask your scent with plum blossom oil, how to cry without sound, just in case. She tells you not to fear the wedding night, but her hands tremble when she braids your hair. When you finally ask her what to expect, she hesitates. Then she tells you it's different for every woman, that some husbands are gentle, that some are not, that it's your job to be still and silent either way. You ask about love. She looks away, then she tells you about her own wedding, how she didn't see your father's face until the veil was lifted, how he didn't speak to her for a week after the ceremony, how he finally did, only to ask whether she'd borne fruit yet. She says it like she's talking about weather. You don't ask more, you already know too much. Soon, the deal is made. The Nakado returns with documents, and the celebration begins, not yours, mind you. The celebration is for the men. They drink sake and toast to alliances, while you're led away to prepare for the wedding, which is less a joyous event and more of a ceremonial transfer of ownership. On the day of the wedding, your hands shake so hard you can't tie your own obi. Servants do it for you, wrapping your body in silk so tightly you can barely breathe. Your face is powdered white, your lips painted in red, a symbol of submission. You're not allowed to smile, you're not allowed to speak unless spoken to. You are in every way that counts, a blank slate upon which your husband will now write his story. The wedding ceremony is long and full of bows. You bow to your father, to your groom's family, to the gods, to everyone except yourself. There's a moment where you glimpse your new husband. He's not terrible. He's also not kind. He's 27, with a stern mouth and eyes that never meet yours. You think he smells like pine sap and tobacco smoke. He barely speaks to you. He doesn't need to, he's already won. Later, during the night, you're escorted to his estate. The room you're given is beautiful and spare, with tatami floors and a scroll of cranes on the wall. You sit alone on your knees, waiting. Your hands are folded, your heart pounds. You're 14, remember? And still you know what's about to happen. You've been told it's your duty, that it's sacred, that it will hurt. When he enters, you bow deeply. He doesn't bow back. He unties his sash slowly, like a soldier disarming after a long battle. You keep your eyes down. When he touches you, it is not violent, but it is not gentle either. It is mechanical, quiet, almost detached. You try not to breathe too loudly. You try not to think about your mother's hands as they braided your hair. Afterward, he says nothing. He gets up, dresses, and leaves. A maid enters to check the sheets. She folds them neatly whether they're stained or not. You're given a cup of sweetened water and told to rest. You don't. You stare at the ceiling until morning. That is the first night. There will be many more. None of them like the scrolls you once glimpsed. None of them about pleasure, at least not for you. You are here to bear sons, to uphold your husband's name, to never speak of what happens behind closed screens. And somehow you already understand that this quiet, invisible kind of endurance will be the most violent thing you ever do. You wake before dawn, though you barely slept. The soft blue light pushes through the shoji screen as the birds begin their tiny arguments in the garden trees. You sit up slowly, your thighs ache, and you feel a damp weight settle in your stomach, not from pain, but from the realization that this is now your life. A wife, a woman officially, and you still don't even know your husband's favourite food. The maid who enters avoids eye contact as she kneels and pours hot water for your morning wash. Her silence says more than any words could. She's older than you. Maybe she went through something similar. Maybe she thinks you're lucky. Or maybe she just doesn't care. You're not sure which would be worse. Your husband, as expected, is gone before sunrise. Samurai men rise early. Duty calls. And in his case, it means inspecting troops, overseeing fields, or sipping tea while discussing tax collection strategies. You'll be lucky to see him before dusk. Maybe not even then. His time is precious. Yours, infinitely less so. You're instructed to bathe and dress in more formal layers. You have your first visit with your mother-in-law this morning, and while no one says it directly, this is the real test. Wedding night aside, your place in this house, this entire social ecosystem, depends more on how you impress her than on anything you do for your husband. The matriarch rules from behind the scenes, a shadow general in silks and hairpins. When you enter her quarters, the air is heavy with incense and expectation. She sits behind a low writing table, eyes sharp and mouth unreadable. You bow so low your forehead brushes the mat. She doesn't tell you to rise. She sips her tea. And when she finally speaks, her voice is soft but edged in steel. She doesn't ask how you're feeling. She doesn't ask if you're frightened or sore or confused. Instead, she asks how many layers you're wearing, whether you folded your sleeves correctly, whether you remembered not to let your hairline appear uneven. These are the measures of a worthy bride. You answer every question with yes, no, or as I was taught. You speak without emotion, your hands folded perfectly in your lap, your eyes on the floor unless directed otherwise. You do well. But even so, her approval comes in the form of faintly raised eyebrows and the comment, "You will need to be strong. He is a difficult man." That's it. That's the warning, the only one you'll get. Over the next few weeks, your routine settles into a rhythm as precise as a temple bell. You rise early, bathe, dress, attend to household tasks. You don't clean, of course not, but you do oversee the other women who do. You're given a ledger, expected to track rice deliveries, lamp oil inventories, and seasonal clothing rotations. You're also expected to learn your new family's ancestral rites. Prayers must be said, altars tended, all in the proper order, all with the proper tone. At night, sometimes your husband comes to you, sometimes not. You never know until you hear the quiet shuffle of his sandals in the corridor. He never speaks first. He never stays. It's not cruel, at least not deliberately, but it's not tender either. You're a ritual, a requirement, a wife performing the required steps to produce an heir. The worst part is the waiting. Lying there each night, wondering whether the sliding door will open, whether you're going to have to disrobe again, pretend your heart isn't pounding, whether tonight will be the night it finally works. Because you're already being watched, not just by your mother-in-law, but by the entire household. They all want to know, have you succeeded yet? That's what they mean when they ask how you're feeling. They don't care if your back aches or your stomach turns. They want to know if you've conceived. They want a son. Your womb is now a public project. Failure is shame. Too many failures and you become something worse than useless. A disappointment. You overhear the servants talk in hushed voices near the well. They say your husband had a mistress once, that she died of fever before she could give him a child. Some say he's cursed. Others say he's picky. One older maid says bluntly, he only cares if she's silent. You pretend not to hear. You keep walking. But the words follow you like a chill wind down your back. Weeks turn into months. You learn to anticipate your husband's patterns. You learn when to speak and when to go completely still. You learn to fake sleep if he enters your chamber and you can't bear to be touched again. He never forces you, but refusal is not allowed either. You're his wife. That's the contract. One night after he's left, you lie awake tracing a crack in the wooden ceiling beam with your eyes. You think of the kunoichi stories, female ninja who used seduction as a weapon. They were trained in pleasure, in performance, in poison. You wonder if they ever felt afraid, or if they too went through the motions with blank faces and clenched jaws. There's a famous saying you once read, the sword and the brush must be united. For men it means martial strength and artistic refinement. For women the equivalent would be the fan and the futon, beauty and obedience. You start to understand how those two things, when combined, become their own kind of weapon. You begin to notice things, the way the senior maid whispers messages between the kitchen and the inner courtyard, the way your mother-in-law only speaks certain commands when the window is open. Power in this house flows like water, quietly and always down a hill, unless it's diverted. One evening, a visiting samurai makes a comment at dinner, praising the blossoming of the new bride. Your husband says nothing, but his fingers tighten around his chopsticks. Later that night, he comes to you with uncharacteristic intensity. It's not passion. It's ownership, reclaimed. You don't resist. You don't react. You stare at the shadows flickering on the paper walls and try to disappear into them. Afterward, you sit alone, your robe half loose, wondering how long you can keep doing this. But you know the answer. Forever, if needed. That's what samurai wives do. You carry the honor. You bear the children. You survive. The first time your name appears in a marriage ledger, it's written alongside charts of rice tax and land values, sandwiched between livestock tallies and armor repairs. That's the level of romance you're working with here. But behind the brushstrokes and paper, there's a deeper truth. Your marriage wasn't chosen in a quiet moment of parental whim. It was negotiated like a treaty, with the calm, ruthless logic of a battlefield strategist. That's how it works in the samurai class. Marriages are not about hearts fluttering behind cherry blossoms. They're about alliances, balance, power. And you're the hinge. You find this out when your mother-in-law invites you to sit in on a meeting with the Nakodo, the matchmaker who is back to arrange the union of your husband's younger cousin. You're allowed to listen but not speak. You sit, silent and folded like origami, listening to adults debate things like bloodlines, banner affiliations and fertility patterns. The young girl they're discussing is 13, and from a clan known for its tea ceremony masters. She's thin, the Nakoda says with concern, but her aunt bore 7 sons, so the stock is good. Stock, like breeding horses. You're reminded of your own matchmaking process, and how it wasn't a single conversation but a network of whispers, charts, and calculations. Your mother never told you exactly what was said, but you piece it together over time. Your family was moderately wealthy, but politically neutral, safe but not threatening. Your husband's clan needed someone like that. No scandal, no enemies, no debts. The match was approved based on land proximity, family alliances, and your reliable temperament. That was the phrase used. Not intelligent, not graceful, reliable, like weather. And the astrology. Oh, the astrology. A monk had consulted the zodiac signs, birth hours, and celestial harmonies before your engagement was finalized. You were born in the year of the boar, at the hour of the snake. Your husband, a rat in the hour of the dragon. Compatible, apparently. But only if a black rooster was sacrificed during the new moon. You didn't ask questions. You never do, but you still have nightmares about that rooster sometimes. Once married, you discover how deeply embedded these rituals are. not just in your life, but in every corner of the samurai class. Marriages are tools. They can be forged, sharpened, and, when necessary, used to cut enemies down. You learn of women sent to marry men twice their age because it meant inheriting a strategic mountain pass. Of others given to warlords to end a blood feud. These aren't just wives, they're political pawns draped in silk. But, and here's the twist, it's not just the men playing the game. One afternoon you walk in on your mother-in-law in conversation with the wife of a visiting lord. They are sipping tea, but the air is thick with strategy. She has eyes like her grandmother, the visitor says, meaning a cousin she's considering for her second son. Your mother-in-law nods and says, and the same stubbornness, no doubt. They smile, sip, and silently agree on whether the girl will be obedient or a handful. In 10 minutes, they've laid the foundation for a new alliance. You realise then that women like her aren't just passive players, they're the game board architects. They remember who married whom, who lost a child last winter, who insulted whom during the Spring Blossom Festival 6 years ago. Their weapons aren't swords, but secrets. And once you're inside that circle, you're expected to play too. Your training begins slowly. You're asked to supervise tea with visiting daughters, to offer polite comments on obi colours and marriage prospects. These conversations are never about fabric or fashion. They're coded tests, how the girl responds, how she smiles, whether she looks down too much or too little. You're learning how to profile wives before they even know they're being judged. But here's the awkward, whispered part. For all the strategic pairing and zodiac charts, no one actually talks to you about what happens once the wedding's over. Sure, they'll show you how to wear bridal robes, how to kneel properly, how to weep prettily if your father-in-law dies unexpectedly. But sex, actual, physical, what happens on your wedding night sex, that's not in the curriculum. You remember your own wedding night all too well, the silence, the cold touch, the sheer confusion of it. And you also remember that the only person who gave you any warning was your younger aunt, who pulled you aside 2 nights before the ceremony and said in a voice so soft you almost missed it, "It might not hurt as much if you don't flinch." That was the entire lesson. So now, as you begin mentoring the next generation of girls, you wonder whether to say more, whether to tell them the truth, that sometimes their husbands will be kind and sometimes not, that sometimes it will hurt no matter what, that sometimes it won't hurt at all, and that can be worse because you'll feel nothing, because you are promised pain, and even that doesn't arrive, and that's the real trick. You start expecting nothing. You smile, bow, serve tea, maintain the household, and accept your role like a well-trained performer. But in quiet moments, behind closed screens, you begin to think, to observe, to calculate. There are women, after all, who have learned how to use the system. You hear stories about wives who become powerful advisors whose husbands rely on them, not for affection, but for war planning, estate management, and subtle manipulation of local politics. These women don't speak loudly. They don't wear flamboyant hairpins, but their influence runs deeper than any blade. And there are others. Courtesans, for example, looked down on, sure, but trained in conversation, RPE, seduction. Some become advisors to lords. Some even control enough wealth to buy land. The irony isn't lost on you. The women with the most freedom in this world are often the ones society claims to shame. You wonder sometimes if you could be like them, not a courtesan exactly, but someone who uses what little space she has to move the pieces. You can't choose who you marry, you can't choose who touches you. But maybe, just maybe, you can choose what to do with your silence. Because silence you're learning is its own kind of language. And you're getting better at speaking it every day. The wedding night is supposed to be the beginning of something. At least that's what all the poetry says. The way the scrolls describe it, you're meant to become one body, one soul, bonded by sake, incense, and destiny. But when the paper doors close and the sandals fall silent, it's not destiny that climbs into bed beside you. It's a man you barely know, following a script written long before either of you were born. And that script doesn't include asking how you feel. Your second night as a wife comes with fewer formalities but no more comfort. There are no more ceremonial bows, no more lacquered hair ornaments poking your scalp. Just the slow, predictable steps of a man performing his duty with the same efficiency he brings to sword maintenance. Your body is still sore, your stomach is in knots, but you pretend to be still, calm, graceful. Because you're already trained to understand that your pain isn't the point, only your function. The ritual unfolds again. He says nothing as he removes his robes. You follow suit, keeping your eyes averted because you've been told that directness can be taken as insolence, or worse, hunger. You don't want to be insolent. You definitely don't want to appear hungry. He moves with practiced hands. Not rough exactly, but deliberate, like someone who's memorized the steps but never bothered to ask if the music had changed. There's a moment where your arms touch, skin against skin, and something sharp flares in your chest. It's not passion, it's grief. For yourself. For every girl who's ever been asked to smile while being silently rewritten. You lie there afterward, with your hair fanned across the pillow, and your thoughts racing like wild horses through a fog. This is what it's going to be. Not once, not twice, not even just for a few months. For years. A life of shared silences, of duty misread as devotion. And the next morning it's like nothing happened. No acknowledgement, no conversation. Just the shuffle of servants preparing tea, and your mother-in-law tapping on the screen to remind you you're expected at the family altar for morning prayers. Eventually, even the awkwardness fades. You develop a rhythm. You recognize the signs. When he drinks slightly more sake at dinner, when the maid begins warming your bedding earlier than usual. These are the cues. There's no affection, but there's routine. Sometimes he's in a hurry. Sometimes he lingers. He never asks your permission. He never asks anything. And this becomes your normal. But it's not that simple. Because sometimes, just sometimes, you feel something. Not love, not desire, but a strange heat that pulses through your body in quiet rebellion. Your skin remembers touches long after your heart has numbed. You begin to understand the split that other women hinted at, the one between the body and the self. Your body performs. Your mind detaches. It's like floating above the futon, watching someone else beneath the sheets, wondering who she really is and how she ended up there. You speak to no one about it. Not your mother-in-law who would scold you for being ungrateful, not your friends who have either already married or are too frightened of their own futures to ask questions. You keep it inside where it festers and occasionally flares. One day you hear laughter from the servants' quarters. The young kitchen girl is telling a story about a bride who bit her groom on the wedding night. Bit him hard enough to draw blood. Everyone gasps, then bursts into laughter. You don't laugh. You envy the girl in the story, not for the blood, but for the audacity. For the fact that in that moment she made it hers. Of course, such stories always end with consequences. The biting bride was sent back to her father's home in disgrace. Her family paid fines. Her name was whispered with shame. But still, she was remembered. That bite was her only act of rebellion, and people still talk about it years later. You begin to notice other small rebellions, quiet ones. The head maid who arranges the flower vases with provocative angles. The cousin who wears her inner robe a little too loosely when male guests are present. The tea-serving girl who pauses just a moment too long when pouring for the junior samurai. These aren't accidents. They're messages. Codes. Women like you can't say much, but sometimes you don't have to. And somewhere, under all that silken etiquette, there's an undeniable fact. People are still people. Desires flicker, even in arranged marriages. One day, a visiting poet recites a verse at dinner about the aching of unopened petals. Your husband doesn't react, but you notice the faintest twitch at the corner of his mouth. Later that night, he touches you more slowly. Still no words, but you wonder if maybe, just maybe, something stirred. Or maybe it's just the sake. The truth is, not all samurai marriages are cold. Some evolve. You've seen it in older couples, the subtle glances, the shared smiles, the way they seem to understand each other without speaking. It's not the courtly romance of Heian Scrolls, but it's something. It's survival reshaped into companionship, and for women like you, that can feel like a miracle. Still, you brace yourself for disappointment. Hope, after all, is dangerous. Then comes the lesson you weren't expecting. One of the senior wives calls you into her chamber one afternoon. You expect another lecture about rice inventory or family lineage. Instead, she pours you plum wine and, in a voice thick with years and secrets, says, "You can't control what happens in the night, but you can control how it affects you." You blink, unsure whether it's advice, a threat, or an invitation. She continues, "It's not about submission. It's about survival. You do what you must, but never forget who you are when the candles go out. Keep something for yourself, even if it's small." That night, for the first time, you keep your eyes open. You watch him as he moves, as he breathes, as he leaves. You don't look away. You don't retreat inside yourself. It's not defiance. It's documentation. You're present, even if you're not wanted to be. And afterward, you don't feel smaller. You feel sharper, like something in you has crystallized. Maybe it's not love. Maybe it never will be. But it is you, awake, aware, and quietly taking notes. Sex becomes a schedule, not a conversation, not a surprise, but a kind of choreography rehearsed in shadows. Twice a week, sometimes more if the moon is favourable or a priest whispers that now is a good time to conceive. There's no spontaneity in it, no tender brush of the hand, no shared laugh under tangled sheets. It's not cold exactly, but it's not warm either. It's a duty, like polishing armour or arranging flowers, except you're the object being arranged. Still, you know better than to resent it out loud. To be resentful is to be ungrateful, and to be ungrateful is to risk everything. So instead, you lean into the ritual. You learn the cues, how he prefers the light dimmed just so, how he never speaks afterward but lingers a moment longer when he's had plum wine. You learn your own body's way of going quiet, how to breathe in shallowly, how to let your mind drift. You become an expert in invisibility, and you take pride in it even if you hate it. What you're doing isn't about pleasure, at least not for you. It's about continuity, bloodline, legacy. You are in every sense an heirloom vessel, and everyone in your household, from the kitchen maids to your husband's distant cousins, is watching for the first hint of a swelling belly. You feel like a field being stared at for sprouting, so you try to make it happen. You eat the fertility rice sent by your mother. You drink bitter teas steeped with roots and moss that smell like wet cloth. You lay perfectly still for an hour afterward, hands folded over your stomach like you're praying. Not for a child exactly, but for progress, for proof that you're doing your job. And still the seasons pass. You bleed each month, quietly, shamefully. You wrap the cloths yourself, bury them in the garden behind the bathhouse. No one says anything, but you feel the temperature change. Your husband grows less patient. Your mother-in-law starts asking gentle questions that feel like knives wrapped in silk. Are you eating well? Are you sleeping enough? Are you keeping your womb warm? You smile and nod and pretend you're not screaming inside, because you're not just failing as a wife, you're failing as a samurai woman. And samurai women don't fail. They endure. They adjust. They drink more of the moss tea. In private, you begin to dread the nights he comes to you. Not because of what he does, he's never cruel, but because each time it feels more like a test you're bound to fail. Each time you pretend it might be the one that works, and each time when you wake and feel nothing, it's like starting over. The hope drains out slowly, like tea from a cracked cup. It's around this time you start to learn what it really means to be useful in a samurai household. Being pleasing is part of it. Being fertile is the bigger part. And when fertility is in question, the whispers begin. One day you pass two servants in the corridor who stop talking the moment you appear. They bow deeply, too deeply. That's how you know they were speaking about you. Later that evening, your mother-in-law casually mentions a distant cousin who bore 5 children by the age of 20 and is still unmarried. You nod. You do not ask what she means. You already know. You try not to think of concubines. But of course you do. The practice is common enough. A samurai of rank can take a concubine, especially if his wife fails to produce an heir. It's not shameful. It's expected. Practical even. She lives in a separate wing of the house, dresses more plainly and bows lower. But her children carry the bloodline just the same. If she bears a son, she earns a place in the family story. If she doesn't, she fades like steam on winter morning. You wonder, how much would it hurt? Not the act itself, but the knowledge. That another woman, with her younger hips and easier smile, might succeed where you've failed. That your husband might visit her instead. That she might bear the name of mother before you ever do. But even in your private moments of jealousy, a part of you whispers, maybe it wouldn't be so bad. Maybe if he had someone else to satisfy the bloodline, the pressure would lift from your shoulders. Maybe he'd leave you alone more often. Maybe you could breathe. Still, the idea burns. You talk to no one about it, not even the other wives, because even though it's common, it's also cruel. It's like being replaced by a younger model of yourself, one that doesn't question, doesn't fail, doesn't weep into her robe when no one's looking. But even as these thoughts swirl in your mind, something else begins to grow. Not a child, but a question, one you can't shake. What if this isn't your failure? What if it's his? It's a thought you dare not speak aloud, but the math supports it. You've followed every ritual, you've counted every day, drunk every foul-smelling brew and bowed to every fertility charm, and still nothing. Your body is not perfect, but it is not broken. What if the issue isn't the soil, but the seed? The more you think about it, the more likely it seems. But of course no one would blame him. He's a man, a samurai, a warrior. If you fail to conceive, the fault is always yours. That's the system. That's the contract you never sign, but still have to uphold. There's an old scroll your mother once showed you, long before you married. It claimed that samurai women should accept duty without question and bear fruit with gratitude. You didn't understand it then. You do now. It's a pretty way of saying be quiet and take the blame, and so you do. But something in you begins to curl in protest. One night, after another failed attempt, your husband stands at the edge of the room, looking out at the garden. He says almost casually, "We must visit the shrine soon. The priest says our luck is blocked." You nod. You kneel. You say, "Of course." But inside you think, it isn't luck that's blocked. And for the first time you imagine a life without children. A life where your body remains yours, not a vessel. You don't weep. You don't despair. You simply wonder, if that happens, who will you become? Not a mother, not a grandmother, not the honoured matriarch with a string of sons. Just you. That thought is terrifying and liberating. You hear the name for the first time whispered between two lacquered fans during a slow, sticky summer afternoon. Kunoichi. The word rolls off the tongue like perfume and poison all at once. You weren't meant to hear it. These conversations never happen in public, not officially, but you catch it anyway, tucked in between phrases about rice harvests and robe embroidery. One of the older wives leans in and murmurs, "She trained like a kunoichi, they say," and then they both go silent. That kind of silence always means danger or fascination. That night you ask the old seamstress about it. She's half deaf and no longer useful in the main household, which makes her the perfect person to tell you things no one else will. She squints at you, her needle pausing in midair, and says, "Ah, the shadow women. You'd know them if you saw them, or maybe you wouldn't. That's the point." From what she tells you, a kunoichi is not a wife, not a concubine, not even a courtesan. She's something else entirely. A woman trained in the arts of stealth, seduction, and sabotage. She can fold origami with poisoned paper. She can gut a man with a hairpin. And yes, she can make herself unforgettable in bed if it means completing her mission. You're not sure whether to be horrified or intrigued. Probably both. The stories vary. Some say kunoichi served as spies for rival lords, slipping into enemy castles under the guise of maidservants or dancers, only to vanish into the night after extracting secrets or blood. Others say they were trained in mountain temples by warrior monks who believed that the feminine body, properly weaponized, could be more dangerous than any blade. You wonder how much of it is true, how much is just fevered imagination, how much was invented by frightened men. You read between the lines of old scrolls and poems, and suddenly everything seems suspect. That travelling dancer who entertained the shogun and vanished? Possibly kunoichi, the mistress who was never seen again after the lord's sudden illness? Suspicious. The shrine maiden who served tea to 3 different generals and was never touched? Very suspicious. Even your mother-in-law won't speak of them directly, but when you mention the name in passing, she simply replies, "A woman who knows how to listen and when to move is more powerful than you think." Then she sips her tea and says no more. The implication is clear. It's not about learning to fight, not with weapons anyway. It's about presence, observation. Mastery of the body, yes, but also of perception. A kunoichi knows when to blush, when to giggle, when to feign innocence, and when to strike. She knows what her touch means, and how to weaponize it. And perhaps most importantly, she knows when to disappear. The very idea of that kind of autonomy fills you with an ache you can't quite name. You begin to move differently. Not dramatically, just small shifts. You start paying more attention to the way your body speaks, even when your voice is silent. How a glance can signal interest or resistance. How a shift in posture can disarm someone faster than a drawn blade. You start to feel your own skin again, not just as a duty-bound vessel, but as territory. At night, when your husband visits you, you experiment, subtly. A pause here, a breath there. You're not seductive, not exactly. You don't have the training for that. But you begin to understand what it means to control a moment, to sense when he is vulnerable, distracted, uncertain. He doesn't notice your awareness, but you do. You feel it humming in your chest like a secret pulse. One evening, you pass by the gardener's quarters and hear something odd. A woman's voice, low and commanding, reciting what sounds like poetry but with a rhythm that feels off. You pause. It's not poetry, it's instruction. She's teaching him something, hand positions, footwork, maybe even breathing. You can't see who she is, but her words burn into your ears. The body does not forget what it practices, even in silence. You think about that for days, and suddenly the idea of sex changes again, not just for reproduction or ritual or resignation, but as power, as a method, as an art form. You're still not sure you'd ever want to use it like that. You don't fantasize about slitting throats with fans or seducing rival lords for scrolls. But the fact that a woman could is intoxicating. And more than that, it's proof. Proof that within this rigid world, women found cracks, hidden passages, trapdoors to autonomy, even if those doors came with risk. Some say Kunoichi never married. Others say they posed as wives, lived double lives, raised children with one hand while poisoning diplomats with the other. The debate continues even now. No one agrees whether they were real or just a fantasy cooked up by terrified men and rebellious women alike. But real or not, their legend matters, because it gives you something you didn't have before, a story that doesn't end in quiet compliance. A version of womanhood that includes strategy, sensuality, and the ability to vanish before the blade lands. You find yourself imagining one, a woman not unlike yourself, walking these same corridors 100 years ago. She kneels when expected, bows on command, smiles when spoken to, but beneath her robes, hidden in the folds of silk, are truths sharper than any dagger. She knows the plants that paralyze. She knows the secrets of men who assume she is deaf and dumb. And when the time comes, she will not scream, she will not run, she will simply move and be gone. That image stays with you. Not because you want to become her, but because you finally understand that within the shell of obedience there's room for something else to grow. Cunning, control, awareness, and maybe, if you're careful, freedom. The first time you hear the word okugata, it's from a maid who's been with the household longer than you've been alive. She's talking about another woman, someone you haven't met, saying, "She acts like an okugata, but she's barely a side piece." The tone isn't kind, the word hangs in the air, sticky and full of meaning. You recognize the layers in it right away. Okugata means the official wife of a samurai, the one with status and ceremony. But the phrase side piece doesn't need translation. Concubines. They exist in theory when you're younger, like vague shapes on a map labelled "Here be mistresses." But now, as a wife yourself, they become painfully real, not just whispered about, but seen, sometimes even introduced, and always managed, never discussed in full voice. You encounter the first one at a seasonal gathering hosted by your husband's cousin, a smug little man who wears perfume and refers to his horse as a creature of feelings. The woman arrives late, dressed in a plum-coloured kimono that walks the line between elegance and provocation. She is not introduced by name, just as a companion, the euphemism of choice, but everyone knows, you know. Her eyes scan the room without flinching, and when she catches you looking, she smiles like she's already won a game you didn't know you were playing. She is not a wife, but she is cared for, fed, clothed in fine silk. She has servants, she is not locked away. She is permitted to stand beside the man who claims her without needing a ring or a title, and no one stops her. No one challenges it. In fact, the other wives pretend not to notice her at all, as if that woman is a gust of wind, a lovely vase, something decorative that doesn't warrant emotional investment. You learn quickly that the presence of concubines isn't a betrayal. It's not even scandalous. It's part of the deal. Samurai men have duties. Their seed must continue. If the wife cannot conceive, or even if she simply bores him, it's socially acceptable, even encouraged, to diversify his options. You're told not to be jealous. It is his right, your mother-in-law says. He honours you by returning to your bed. The logic is exhausting, and yet the reality of it gnaws at you. Because while they don't have your title, concubines can hold a terrifying amount of power, especially if they bear sons. A concubine with a child becomes more than just a warm body. She becomes a permanent feature of the family, someone with blood in the game. The elder wives whisper stories of women who started as mistresses and ended as household authorities, their sons growing up to displace legitimate heirs. They call these women silent storms. So when your husband starts coming to your chamber less frequently, you feel the shift before anyone says a word. His schedule grows erratic. You wait alone more nights than not. And when he does arrive, he's tired or distant or smelling faintly of citrus oil, something you don't keep in your room. You say nothing, but you know. Then comes the quiet confirmation. A new servant is hired. Young, round-faced, with hands too soft for actual work. She's assigned to clean your husband's quarters, only his, and when you ask what her other duties are, you're told she knows her place. That phrase again, everyone knowing their place. You start hearing more gossip, not about your husband directly, he's discreet, but about men of his rank and the way these arrangements are handled. One daimyo, they say, housed his concubine in the same residence as his wife, in a wing known as the Hidden Blossom Quarters. Another kept 3 women on rotation and gave each one a poem at the start of every season. Some wives welcomed these women like sisters, others ignored them, a few poisoned them. You try to imagine what kind of wife you'll be. One afternoon you encounter her by accident. The young servant girl turned something else. She's coming out of your husband's study, adjusting her collar, eyes wide when she sees you. She bows too low, stammers too much. You don't ask anything, you don't need to. That night your husband comes to you. He is gentle, unusually so. His hands linger at your waist. He kisses your shoulder, something he hasn't done in years. You lie there like a shrine statue, still and unreadable, and let him finish whatever penance this is. When he leaves, you cry for the first time in months. Not because of him, not even because of her, but because you feel like your body has become a room other people enter to make amends. Still, you don't rage, you don't throw bowls, you don't demand explanations. Samurai wives do not display emotion in public. They handle humiliation with elegance. Instead, you do what your mother once taught you to do with rotting fruit. You slice around the bruise and use the rest to flavour something sharp. You begin to observe more closely, to understand how mistresses are managed. You start making accidental appearances during shared meals, well-timed walks through the outer garden. You wear robes that are formal but striking. You speak just enough to remind others of your station. You offer the young servant girl extra tea, ask her how her family is. She avoids your gaze. Perfect. In time, your husband returns to your room more regularly. Not every night, not out of guilt, but because you've reminded him subtly who you are. Not the vessel, not the furniture, but at the centre. The one with the household seal and the name recorded in the shrine registry. The wife. Still, you know the line is thin. You know that if the other woman bears him a son, your title will remain, but your power will shift. It's the unspoken truth. Motherhood is the crown. You wear the robe, she could wear the future. And you realise something ugly and freeing at the same time. You might not hate her, not personally, but you will outmaneuver her if you must. Because this isn't about jealousy, it's about position, about survival. Later that week, during a family gathering, your husband introduces you as my honoured wife. He places his hand briefly at your back, a gesture rare and deliberate. The other wives see it. They nod. You see one raise her fan a little higher, blocking her face. And the girl, the servant, the maybe mistress, she brings tea, head bowed, eyes down. She spills a few drops as she pours. You do not smile, but you breathe. And in that small inhale, you reclaim a little piece of the room. The bathhouse becomes your sanctuary, even though you never intended it to mow. At first, it's just another part of the household routine. Timed, scheduled, modestly regulated by senior women with sharp eyes and a deep respect for propriety. But slowly, quietly, it becomes something else. A place where the rules bend just enough for the truth to slip through the steam. You go in late after most of the others have finished. You prefer it that way. The silence, the soft lapping of water against cedar, the feeling of your body finally alone, finally untethered from layers of silk and expectation. The scent of yuzu peel floats on the surface of the bath. Your hair unpins. Your spine softens. It's the only time you let yourself take up space without apology. But some nights you're not alone. One evening you enter and find the bath already occupied. 2 older wives, laughing softly between cups of warm sake, their skin flushed and their shoulders bare. They nod at you with familiarity. but not with deference. You're the official wife, yes, but they've lived longer. They've survived more. In the bathhouse, those titles fade. Everyone is just a woman with sore feet and a body she's trying to live inside. You sit at the edge, pour water over your shoulders, and listen. The conversation drifts from food to children to gossip, always gossip, but not the polite kind shared in tea rooms. This is the raw, whispered kind. Who is pregnant? Who is pretending? Who keeps a monk as a spiritual advisor? The bathhouse becomes a confessional without a priest, and the steam protects every secret. You learn more here than you ever could in formal halls. Like how one woman feigned infertility until her husband agreed to let her adopt a relative's son, her lover's child supposedly. Or how another wife used specific herbs to ensure she wouldn't conceive again after bearing one heir. She said she'd done her duty and didn't need to be anyone's cradle ever again. You soak this up like the hot water itself, stories folded inside stories, every one of them a survival manual written in whispers. Sometimes one of the older women leans closer and drops a truth so blunt it leaves the air still. Pleasure, one says, is not for women like us. Then a pause. Unless we take it. You don't answer, you don't know how, but the words stay with you, and slowly a different kind of conversation starts to form, not just around the temperature of the water or the pain in your back, but around the body itself, around sex, around what it means to want or not to want, around what happens when desire becomes a ghost in your chest that no one acknowledges. One bolder woman, the merchant's wife visiting from a larger town, tells a story so explicit you nearly choke on your breath. About a performer from Kyoto trained in sensual touch who could bring a woman to tears without removing a single layer of silk. The women listening don't giggle like girls, they listen like scholars, you do too. And then someone asks, "Have you ever…" But the sentence dies halfway through. It's not finished. It doesn't need to be. The silence after it says enough. That night, as you soak alone, you run your fingers over your own stomach, your thighs, the places that are always touched but never truly felt. Your skin remembers more than you thought. You wonder if maybe pleasure isn't a gift given, but something waiting to be reclaimed. And maybe, just maybe, you don't need permission to find it. Another evening, two younger wives enter the bath while you're already settled. They're new to the household, nervous, careful. You greet them with a nod. They return it, eyes flicking toward the floor. Then one of them, emboldened by the heat or the hush of the moment, asks you quietly, "Is it always so distant?" She doesn't say what it is. She doesn't need to. You consider lying. You consider saying what your mother-in-law once told you. Gets better with time. But instead you give her something closer to the truth. Sometimes not. But it's rarely yours. She nods. The other one doesn't speak. But they both stay longer in the water that night. It's in these spaces, the bathhouse, the garden at dusk, the shared glance across a folding screen, that real understanding grows. You begin to see how other women navigate the same narrow hallways in different ways, some with compliance, some with cunning, some with quiet rebellion dressed up as obedience, and others simply surviving day by day, hoping that the man in their bed will someday see them as more than just a duty. You also start to understand that bodies aren't just vessels, they're instruments, and you've never been taught how to play your own. So you experiment privately. You learn which herbs relax your muscles, which oils bring warmth to your skin. You learn to move slower, not for someone else, but to see what it feels like when you're not waiting for it to be over. You listen to your breath, you take time, you even start requesting certain bath additives, mugwort for circulation, camellia oil for smoothness, powdered ginger when your chest feels tight. The older women notice. They ask questions, you answer vaguely, but not too vaguely. And just like that, a new kind of gossip begins, that the young wife has found her own rhythm. You don't deny it. You don't need to. Because in a world where sex is currency and silence is armor, reclaiming your own body becomes the most rebellious thing you can do. And in the bathhouse, under the cloak of steam and the creak of old wood, you're not anyone's wife, not anyone's duty. You're just yourself, breathing, floating, remembering what it feels like to belong to no one. Not even for long, but long enough. The first time you suspect you're pregnant, it doesn't come with a parade of symptoms or an otherworldly glow. It begins with an absence. Your body, usually reliable in its painful regularity, simply pauses. The blood doesn't come. You wait 1 day, 2, then a week. Your breath catches every time you visit the chamber pot. You begin counting the days in your head, one finger discreetly tapping your thigh beneath your robes. You say nothing at first. Not to your maid, not to your mother-in-law, certainly not to your husband. You don't want to speak too soon and invite disappointment into the room. You've learnt that hope, when spoken too loudly, has a habit of collapsing under its own weight. So you wait, quietly. And during those early days, every breath you take feels like it's trying not to disturb a butterfly balanced inside your belly. Of course your silence only lasts so long. Your body betrays you in subtle ways. You gag at the scent of dried fish. You feel dizzy while folding linens. Your pulse quickens when you climb even the shallowest of steps. The older women begin to notice. They exchange knowing looks. One of them offers you tea with shiso leaf, just in case. You accept it with a bowed head and a pounding heart. The confirmation comes from the midwife, a soft-spoken woman with hands that feel like warm cloth and knowledge passed down through whispers. She nods after examining you and says, "It's early, but the signs are clear." Her eyes twinkle, and she bows slightly. "May the ancestors smile upon your womb." You nod, too stunned to speak. You're flooded with emotion, relief, fear, anticipation, and a faint terror you didn't expect. Because now your body isn't just yours. It never truly was, but now it's a shrine, a battlefield, a ticking clock. Word spreads quickly. Your husband doesn't say much, just places a hand on your shoulder the next evening and looks at you with something like approval, like a craftsman might regard a sturdy piece of furniture. Your mother-in-law, however, springs to life as if she's been waiting for this moment for decades. She orders changes to your bedding, your meals, your schedule. You are moved to a warmer room, no more walks in the garden, no more lifting even the lightest lacquer tray. You're assigned 2 new attendants. They follow you everywhere. At night, they sleep just outside your room like silent guards. You're watched constantly. You miss solitude the way some people miss lovers. Pregnancy, you quickly learn, isn't about you. It's about the family, the bloodline, the legacy. You're just the vessel. Revered, yes, but not for who you are, for what you might be growing. Still, you cling to private moments of joy, the flutter of movement deep in your belly like a goldfish swimming under the surface, the way your breasts ache just slightly, as if preparing themselves for something profound. You press your hands to your stomach and whisper things you wouldn't dare say out loud. Who are you? Will you stay? The household turns into a parade of superstitions and unsolicited advice. Don't look at fire. Your child might be born with a red birthmark. Don't sleep facing north. It invites restless spirits. Eat more daikon to ensure a fair-skinned child. Avoid bitter melon unless you want a sour disposition. Everyone becomes an expert in your body but you. You keep a mental list of everything you've been told to eat, avoid, pray to, wear, or dream about. The list is longer than your wedding contract, but you comply. Because now the pressure is even greater. If you miscarry, it will be spoken of in hushed tones for years. If you bear a daughter, there will be polite congratulations followed by immediate efforts to try again. If you bear a son, you will finally matter. You try not to think about that, about the weight of a single child determining your worth. Instead, you focus on surviving. Morning sickness hits you like a betrayal. The nausea is relentless. You gag in the mornings, at the sight of rice, at the smell of charcoal. But you are not allowed to complain. Instead, you're offered special teas and told stories of women who vomited daily and still bore 10 healthy sons. You want to scream, you sip the tea. As the months pass, your body swells, your feet ache, your back knots, your robes no longer fit properly. You're reshaped, not just by the child inside you, but by the way people look at you, reverently, cautiously, like you might break or explode. One evening, your husband comes to you, not for sex, of course. That stopped months ago, but with a bowl of persimmons. He places them beside your pillow, says nothing, then leaves. It's the smallest gesture, but somehow it moves you. You cry after he goes, wiping your tears with the sleeve of a robe now too tight at the waist. The baby kicks for the first time in your 7th month. It startles you, like a reminder that this isn't theory anymore. There's a life inside you, something real. You place your hand on your belly and say nothing, but your eyes well up. You want this child to come safely. You want it to come strong. But most of all, you want it to come without turning you into something you won't recognize. Your due date draws near, and with it, your world shrinks further. You're moved into the ubuyashiki, the birth room, a separate space where light is filtered through paper, and male footsteps are not allowed. Only women here, midwives, senior wives, prayer leaders. You are bathed, massaged, wrapped in charms. You are told not to fear. That pain is temporary. That women are built for this. You don't believe any of it, but you endure, because there is no other option, and because now, more than ever, your body belongs not to you, but to the next generation, and it doesn't care how you feel about it. When labour begins, it doesn't feel cinematic or glorious. There's no gasp, no dramatic moment where you cry out, clutching your belly as the world shifts. It starts quietly, an ache in your lower back, a warmth in your thighs, like your bones have remembered something ancient and terrible. You're reclining in the birth room, staring at the soft sway of the paper lantern above you, when the pain tightens and holds for a few long, breathless seconds. Then it releases, and for a moment you think, maybe that wasn't it. But then it returns, sharper this time, and your whole world begins to fold inward. They told you it would hurt. Of course they did. But no one quite explained what kind of hurt it would be. Not sharp like a cut, not sudden like a fall. It's a grinding, splitting ache that builds like a tide and crests just long enough to make you forget how to breathe. Then it pulls away, mocking you, and you know it's only going to come back stronger. The midwife, hands always warm and always moving, begins instructing you in that low, rhythmic voice you have come to associate with pain. Breathe, rock, do not tighten. You try, you do, but your whole body wants to run, and it can't. You're trapped inside yourself, caught in a war your ancestors fought and no one remembered to write down. Someone ties your hair back. Another woman begins chanting. You recognize the voice. It's one of the older wives. She's repeating a birth prayer, a mix of Buddhist mantra and something older, something primal, something that sounds more like a plea than a blessing. Your husband is not here. Men are not allowed near birthing. He's pacing, probably, or asleep, or drinking sake with the anticipation of a father who has done none of the work and will still receive all the congratulations. You feel a brief flash of hatred, which is quickly drowned by another contraction that rolls through your body like fire under your ribs. The midwife checks your dilation using fingers that are quick but gentle. Not yet, she mutters, more to herself than to you. You don't want to know what not yet means. You just want it to be over. Time becomes a blur. Hours lose their shape. You measure the night not by the lantern's flicker, but by the intervals between pain. The midwife gives you a cloth to bite down on. You chew it like bark. Sweat rolls down your temples. At some point you realize you're screaming, not loudly, not like the dramatized cries of kabuki theatre, but low and guttural, a sound from the part of yourself that still remembers how to howl. They give you ginger water, then rice porridge, then nothing. You vomit twice. You're wiped clean with soft towels, someone strokes your back. The pain grows sharp and relentless, and when your water finally breaks, it feels like both a release and a death sentence. The pushing begins, and it's worse. You thought it couldn't get worse, and you were wrong. Your legs are shaking and your thighs are cramping, and you think, I'm going to split in half. You no longer care who's in the room. You just want this thing out. You feel the baby's head like a stone pressing down, refusing to move. You push, and the midwife says again, and you push again, and you scream, and then there's a tearing sensation, and your mind just fragments, and suddenly it's out. The room shifts from sound to silence. The child is lifted, and you don't even ask what it is. You just listen for the sound. That one sound, and then you hear it, a cry sharp and thin, the kind that cuts through every other noise. It's a boy, someone says. You're not sure if you feel joy or just relief, or if those two are the same right now. Your body collapses into the futon, you are lightheaded, empty, soaked. Someone presses warm cloths to your thighs. You don't have the strength to move. They begin the afterbirth process. The midwife murmurs about tearing. She says it's minor. She says you were lucky. You don't feel lucky. You feel hollow. You feel like something was stolen from you, not born. The baby is placed near you, wrapped in linen. You look down at him, red-faced, squinting, perfect in the way that all newborns are. You should feel love. Maybe you do, but mostly you feel exhausted and terrified, and absolutely unprepared for whatever comes next. And then the next wave hits. Not a physical pain, an emotional one. Because now the work begins, now you are a mother, which, in this house, in this world, means more than just feeding and caring for a child. It means proving yourself every day. It means protecting your son's status. It means watching over your shoulder for other women with hungry eyes and empty cradles. It means fighting for influence, not with daggers, but with dinners, favours, alliances. They bathe the baby with warm water infused with mugwort and salt. He cries the whole time. You watch with a kind of distant fascination. The midwife whispers a blessing over his head. Your mother-in-law enters, finally, and bows deeply, not to you, but to the child. You are acknowledged, but only as the conduit. Still you cling to one thing, it is your body that did this. Not his, not theirs, yours. Your husband visits later. He picks up the child, holds him like he's lifting a prize scroll. He doesn't look at you, just says, "You've done well." And in that moment you want to laugh and cry and scream all at once, because you didn't do this for praise. You did it because you had no other option, but still you did it. And now everything changes. The bedding is cleaned, the room reset, the women come and go. And in the quiet moment before dawn, with the baby asleep beside you and your body torn but still whole, you whisper to yourself a single truth. You survived. He leaves for war 2 months after the baby is born. There's no fanfare, no dramatic farewell in the garden, just a quiet morning with muted footsteps, armour being fastened outside, and one brief glance between you as he walks past the nursery screen. He doesn't kiss you, he doesn't hold his son, he simply nods, more out of habit than affection. And then he's gone. The clatter of horses, the murmur of retainers, and the sudden stillness that follows make the air feel heavier than before. You wrap the baby tighter in his swaddling cloth and whisper, "He'll be back," though you're not sure if that's a promise or a lie. With your husband away, a strange thing happens. The pressure loosens, not vanishes, never that, but eases, like the lacing of a corset undone just enough to let you breathe. You're still watched, of course, still expected to perform your duties as a new mother, household manager, and samurai wife. But without his constant presence, your world stretches slightly at the edges. You take slower walks in the garden. You linger longer over tea. You even begin to enjoy the silence again. The baby, your son, your heir, your anchor, grows stronger each week. His cries become louder, his fists more insistent. He smells like milk and heat and possibility. In the early hours of the morning, before the maids arrive to help, you lie beside him on the futon and listen to his tiny breaths, feeling both terrified and grounded. For all the pomp and tradition surrounding samurai families, nothing feels more raw or more real than this. Your body, his body, skin against skin, two survivors wrapped in the same blanket. And yet, loneliness seeps in. Not the kind that comes from being abandoned or ignored, but the subtler kind that rises in the quiet corners of a day. You don't miss your husband, not in the way women are supposed to, but you miss something. Conversation, recognition, the sensation of being looked at, not as a vessel, but as a person. The household runs smoothly, the child thrives, the older women offer nods of approval, but you begin to wonder if this is it, if this is the whole reward, functioning efficiently, raising heirs, and growing invisible with dignity. One morning, while walking through the rear garden with your child nestled against your chest, you see him, not your husband, a boy, maybe 17, maybe 20, kneeling by the koi pond with a lacquer bucket in hand. He's a temple apprentice sent to assist with prayers and upkeep during your husband's absence. He glances up, startled, then bows so deeply his forehead touches the stones. You nod in return and continue walking, but something shifts. The next day, he's there again, feeding the fish with long, practiced motions, whispering mantras under his breath. You notice the slope of his neck, the way the early sunlight catches on the fine hairs of his arms. You don't mean to look, but you do. He sees you, not just notices you, sees you. And there it is, that thing you thought you buried beneath silk and structure and childbirth. Not lust, exactly, not even desire, just the recognition that you are more than a title, that you have skin and breath and weight and the ability to affect someone else. It's harmless at first. A shared glance, a few polite words exchanged by the koi pond. You ask him what he feeds them, he tells you, but stumbles over his answer. You smile, he blushes. It's absurd and soft and meaningless, and it lights something in you that hasn't sparked in years. The older women warn you without saying a word. One evening your mother-in-law casually remarks, "Even in peace the walls have ears." The implication lands like a cold splash of water. You nod, bow, return to your room, and sit with the knowledge that you're still being watched, still being measured, still trapped in a beautiful cage. And yet you keep walking past the pond. You don't touch him. Of course you don't. That line is thicker than blood. If crossed, the consequences would be instant and irreversible. Disgrace, exile, possibly death. Even the whisper of an affair can ruin generations. But still, you test the edge of that line, towing up to it just enough to feel the thrill of balance. He starts leaving small things by the bench where you sit. Folded paper cranes, plum blossoms, a perfect pebble shaped like a teardrop. He never waits to see you find them. He never signs his name, but you know, and so does he, and something in you blossoms just from the acknowledgement. At night, as your child sleeps beside you, you lie awake wondering how such a small thing can feel so dangerous, a glance, a gesture, a hand shared. You're not in love, you're not even foolish. You know what this is, an echo of something you'll never have, an affirmation that you still exist outside of function. The war drags on. Your husband's letters arrive occasionally, short, impersonal, mostly updates about rice supplies, border skirmishes and weather. He does not ask about you, he asks about the child, always the child. Your loneliness deepens and you start to wonder about the other women, the concubines, the courtesans, even the kunoichi. How many of them built secret lives inside rigid walls? How many risked everything just to be touched in a way that made them feel alive? The temple boy eventually leaves. One morning he is simply gone, no goodbye, no note, just absence. You walk past the koi pond, now quiet and still. You sit for a long time, the baby bundled on your chest, and stare at the water. One of the fish swims by, golden flashing, unaware of your heartbreak. You cry, just a little, quietly, because it wasn't love, and it wasn't betrayal. It was a glimpse of freedom, a thread of warmth in a life of duty. You return to your chambers, you change your child's robes, you sip your tea, you perform every task as expected, but now you carry something secret inside you. Not shame, not guilt, it's just proof that somewhere beneath the silk and the scars you are still you. You learn very quickly that jealousy doesn't belong to screaming matches or overturned tea trays. Not here, not in the world of samurai women. No, jealousy here is refined. It's lace-thin, sharp as a hairpin, and carried out through etiquette and silence. It's a glance too long at a dinner, a word omitted in a letter, a compliment passed with just enough sugar to sour. And in this house, jealousy is a weapon with its own sheath. It comes unexpectedly like a splinter. You're at a formal meal hosted in your husband's absence, one you're expected to oversee with poise and grace. The guests are polite, old allies and the retainers whose children now play with yours. But then she arrives, the daughter of a visiting magistrate, barely 17, newly engaged, dressed in a summer kimono that clings a little too easily to her shoulders. Her voice is light and practiced. Her laugh, high, intentional. She pours sake with perfect timing, eyes lowered just enough to be modest, but yes, not so low that she misses a single reaction. She isn't doing anything wrong, that's the most infuriating part. She's just charming, bright, full of life in a way you remember being before your body became terrain for childbirth and survival. You know she's harmless, you know she's barely of age, and still, when she giggles at something your husband's cousin says, and your cousin turns red like a novice monk, you feel it, that little pang, not fear, not rage, just that ancient sour little twist that says, remember me. Jealousy here doesn't lash out, it coils, it simmers. And in samurai society it's never directed straight at the target. That would be crass. No, instead, it comes in the form of indirect punishments. A suggestion that the girl's sleeves were a bit too sheer for the occasion. A request that she sit farther from the family altar next time. For symmetry. A gift of dried seaweed rather than plum sweets. Not enough to scold, just enough to send a signal. You didn't invent these methods. You learned them from the other women, from watching your mother-in-law, from listening to the way one matron could destroy another's confidence with a soft sigh and a folded fan. You've seen entire relationships crumple over a misused honorific. But it goes deeper than etiquette. Jealousy isn't just about beauty or youth. It's about power. And in your world, power isn't decided by who swings a sword. It's who gets whispered about, who's remembered in a poem, who has the better position at the dinner seating chart. So you begin to watch more carefully. You become a student of microaggressions, a master of gesture. You know which wife intentionally misarranges her rival's calligraphy brush set, Which concubine keeps forgetting to attend shrine ceremonies? Which woman is placing plum branches, symbols of sensuality, in another woman's flower arrangement? These are not accidents. These are declarations of war. And jealousy isn't just between women. It seeps into your marriage too, subtle and unspoken. Your husband is back now, returned from campaign with more scars and fewer words. He drinks more, sleeps less, doesn't look at you the same way. You don't think he's angry with you, but something is different. Something about the war hollowed him out. Or maybe he just saw too much. Or maybe he's simply tired of your face. So when he laughs, really laughs, at something the concubine says, you freeze. It's not the laugh that wounds, it's the ease, the effortlessness. He doesn't laugh like that with you anymore. Not since before the baby, not since before you became this worn version of yourself. You watch her, the concubine, tilt her head in just the right way. You see the corners of her mouth curl, and you know she knows. Later, she bows deeply when you pass, eyes low, lips tight. Respectful. But something in the depth of her bow feels like a performance, and something in your smile feels like a dare. You don't say anything, you never do. You just shift the seating chart at the next dinner. She's moved farther down, not as punishment, of course, just to balance the energy of the room. Everyone nods. Everyone understands. You begin to keep a mental ledger, not just of offences, but of possibilities, of threats, because jealousy isn't just a reaction, it's a survival instinct. If she bears another child, her influence will rise. If she earns the ear of your husband's chief advisor, your voice will lessen. If she's seen too often in the front garden, she might be assumed to have your approval. You can't afford that. So you tighten your smile, you adjust her access, you keep her in her place, not cruelly but firmly. And sometimes jealousy even turns inward. You catch yourself comparing your body in the mirror, softer now, marked by motherhood. You trace the faint stretch marks at your hips. You recall a time when men used to stare a little longer, when your laugh held lightness instead of calculation. You miss her, your old self, not the girl, but the version of you who didn't always brace for judgment. You miss being wanted for something other than your position. One evening you overhear your husband mention the concubine's singing voice. Unusual, he says, clear, like a bell. The comment is harmless. He might have said the same about a crane, but that night you practice singing under your breath while brushing your hair, just to see if your voice still carries. It does. But no one hears it. Jealousy, you learn, isn't something to conquer. It's something to manage, like a difficult tenant living quietly in the back of your house. You feed it just enough to keep it tame. You let it flare occasionally in small ways. A sharper tone, a glance held a beat too long, then you pull it back. Because the one thing more dangerous than jealousy is letting it show. And you are a samurai wife. You smile, you bow, you sharpen every emotion until it cuts like silk. The scrolls don't teach you everything. The images are beautiful, yes. Graceful women in patterned robes, eyes lowered, lips pursed into bows of politeness, framed by poetic phrases about cherry blossoms and moonlit waters. You spent years studying those images, copying their form, assuming they held all the secrets you needed to carry yourself as a samurai wife. But none of them prepare you for the actual business of sex. Not really. They say the scrolls from the Edo period taught everything a woman needed to know, that a well-trained bride could study them like cookbooks, each page an instruction for pleasure, technique, and balance. And yet, when you first saw one, you were too young to understand what you were looking at. Two naked bodies locked together, limbs drawn with exaggerated softness, smiles curled in eternal calm. It was artistic, abstract, aesthetic, in that careful way men prefer when women are involved, and entirely unrealistic. Your mother kept a few of these scrolls, rolled tightly and stored beneath a stack of ceremonial cloths. She never showed them to you directly. Instead, she left them where you might stumble upon them, as if your education was meant to unfold through accidental discovery. You remember holding one open for the first time, heart pounding, eyes wide, studying the curve of the illustrated woman's back, the way the man's hand fit around her waist, the unnatural stillness of their faces. Everyone looked satisfied. No one looked scared. Of course, they never tell you about the first time someone touches you without asking, or how it feels to be undressed by someone who doesn't care whether you're cold. The scrolls don't say that pleasure, for women like you, often comes second, if it comes at all. So when your mother-in-law finally sits you down years after your wedding night, years after the baby, years after you've endured your husband's ritualized visits without expectation, she surprises you. You assume she's going to lecture you about household affairs. Instead, she lifts her teacup and says, "No one tells the truth about pleasure, least of all to us." You blink, you wait. And she continues, her tone even and sharp. "The scrolls are art. They are not instructions. Don't mistake them for wisdom." You don't know whether to feel grateful or insulted, but the more she speaks, the more something in you stirs. She tells you how women pass real information in whispers, how a courtesan once taught her to breathe during intimacy in a way that kept her control, even when the man thought he had it, how certain foods taken at the right time awaken heat in the body, and how silence is often a better teacher than speech. Men, she says, think sex is conquest, but we know better. We know when it is useful and when it is boring, when it is tolerable, and when we make it our own. She even smiles slightly. The first time you've seen her do so without formality, you remember that conversation for days. You carry it like a secret charm tucked into your sleeve, and slowly you begin to pay closer attention to your body, to your breath, to the small sensations you had learned to ignore. Not because you crave passion, but because you want to feel something again. You start adjusting the way you prepare for your husband's visits. Not dramatically. You still bathe, still perfume, still lie beneath him like ritual requires. But you begin to shift how you respond. You breathe deeper. You focus not on him, but on yourself, on where your own nerves live, on how your skin reacts to pressure. Sometimes it helps, sometimes it doesn't. But for the first time, you're not entirely passive. You're exploring. And in the rare moments when your husband is gentle or even distracted, you experiment further, a hand placed deliberately, a motion you remember from a scroll, modified by instinct. You learn quickly what draws a reaction and what goes unnoticed. It's not much, but it's more than nothing. You find the old scrolls again one evening. You unroll them slowly, alone, and study them with new eyes. Now you see the impossibilities. The way no woman could remain so composed during such acts. The way desire is portrayed as clean, smooth, unmessy. You laugh once, then you trace your finger along the edge of the illustrated figures and wonder how many women stared at these same images, waiting for them to come alive. Your thoughts shift to the red light districts, places you've never visited, of course, but have heard plenty about. Places where women perform pleasure, not as duty, but as craft, where the geisha learn to control conversation, and courtesans are paid more for silence than for sex. You've heard of their training, how they're taught to guide men's desires, not simply respond to them. And it makes you wonder if they're more powerful than you've been allowed to be. You think too about the other wives, about how many of them are pretending, how many lie still at night, counting the breaths until it's over, how many ever dare to say what they feel, if they even know what they feel. One of them, a friend of yours now, confesses during a shared bath that she sometimes touches herself in secret. She says it quietly without shame. She says it helps her remember who she is. You want to ask how, but you already know, so you try. One night, long after your child is asleep and the house has gone still, you lock the screen to your chamber and sit with yourself. At first, you feel ridiculous, embarrassed, like a girl caught playing with fire. But then you slow down, you breathe, you remember the advice, and you find, buried under years of caution and shame, a flicker of something real. You're not sure it's pleasure, not yet, but it's yours, and that's enough. The next time your husband comes to you, you're calmer. Not in submission, but in ownership. You let him move, you let him finish. But this time you don't float away. You stay anchored. You feel everything, even the absence of connection. And strangely, that too is power. Later, as you brush your hair in the dim light, you smile. Not because of him, because of you, because the scrolls never said what came after obedience. But now you're starting to write that story yourself. It begins with a rumour, as all the best stories do. You overhear it while passing through the servant corridor, your sleeves whispering against the walls as you slow just enough to catch the end of a conversation between two maids. They're discussing a place in the city, a quarter hidden just beyond the reach of the palace guard, lined with lanterns and perfumed with clove smoke. It's where those women live, the ones who wear colour boldly and paint their lips like they're telling a secret. The red light district, Yukaku. You're not supposed to be curious. You're a proper wife, a mother, a woman of station. You're above that sort of place. And yet the thought wraps around your mind like incense curling in the air, not out of scandal, but fascination. You've always known it existed, this other world where women aren't just chosen, they choose. Where men bow to women for their conversation as much as their touch. Where rules bend and hierarchy drips like candle wax onto the floor. When the opportunity comes to visit, under the guise of a temple excursion with the elder wives, you take it without hesitation. The itinerary includes a stop at the nearby market, and from there, a brief rest in a quiet tea house known for its seasonal sweets. What no one says aloud is that this particular tea house sits just beyond the painted archways of the Yoshiwara district, close enough to catch the scent of perfumed hair and sweet smoke, far enough to maintain deniability. You don't go inside, that would be improper. Instead, you watch. The women glide past the screens like dancers on air, their robes louder than their voices. Their faces are painted to perfection, expressionless but deliberate. Not geisha, not exactly. Courtesans, oiran. Trained in conversation, calligraphy, tea ceremony, music, seduction. They are paid not just for sex, but for attention, for presence, for the fantasy of being seen. And they are powerful, that much is obvious. You watch one walk past a group of men, she doesn't bow, they do, their laughter falters as she passes. Her chin doesn't drop, it lifts. You wonder what it feels like to be the flame instead of the moth. To be approached, to be pursued, to hold the silence between two people like a blade. One of the elder wives notices your gaze and taps her fan against your wrist. Do not stare too long, they'll know you envy them. You flush, not from shame but from recognition. You do? Later that evening you ask your maid what she knows. She frowns but answers. They are trained, she says, from childhood. They can sing and read better than most court ladies, but they are still sold. She says that word with a softness, like it might break something if it lands too hard. But some rise, she continues. Some save enough to buy their freedom. Some become legends, poets write about them, samurai fall in love with them, and some, she lowers her voice, become advisors, quiet ones, powerful ones. It stays with you because you've spent your entire life doing the right thing, folding your legs, managing the household, bearing children, enduring your husband's presence like weather. You've earned respect, but never power. Not like that. Not the kind that draws attention without effort, that controls not through silence but through spectacle. You begin to read differently. When poems speak of the woman with eyes like dark silk, you no longer assume it's a wife. When a passage in the tale of Genji lingers too long on a woman's scent, her laughter, her refusal to respond, you wonder, was she a courtesan, a ghost, or simply someone who refused to be small? You start experimenting subtly. You change your perfume. You speak less at formal dinners, but when you do, your words land like pebbles in still water, measured, echoing. You wear a sash in a slightly bolder hue. Nothing gaudy, just enough to draw a second glance. It works. Your husband watches you longer than usual one evening. He doesn't say anything, but his hand brushes your lower back as he passes behind you. A rare gesture, small but loaded. You feel it like a spark on your spine. Later that night, you don't lie still like usual. You let your hand move to his, guide it slowly. You say nothing. He responds, surprised, then hungry. It's not love, but it is attention, and you haven't had that in months. You're not becoming a courtesan. You're not foolish, Zech, but you're learning from them. About presence, about performance, about reclaiming control in a world that prefers you quiet, invisible, compliant. You think of them, those women behind paper screens and silk curtains. You wonder what their lives are really like behind the painted faces, if they're ever tired, if they ever wish for less perfume and more quiet, or if the very things that weigh you down, motherhood, respectability, duty, they envy from behind their glamour. One day, while overseeing your son's lesson, you hear him recite a poem about a woman who was not a wife yet captured a warrior's soul. The tutor explains that it's a metaphor. You smile quietly, it's never just a metaphor. You tuck that thought into your sleeve along with all the others, because you now understand that power comes in many forms, through childbearing, through status, through silence, and sometimes through a glance that makes even samurai pause. You are still a wife, but not just a wife, and one day, when your daughter grows old enough to ask about love and marriage, You will tell her about the scrolls, yes, but also about the women in red, the tea that smells like freedom, and the way power often wears perfume. You will not tell her to be obedient. You will tell her to be watching. Always watching. It only takes one moment. One look too long, one brush of the hand that lingers past courtesy, one whisper spoken in the wrong place, or the right one, depending on what story you're telling. That's how forbidden love begins. Not with fireworks, not with scandal, but with a tiny breach in the wall you've spent your whole life building. You don't mean for it to happen. Of course not. You're not foolish, not careless. You've seen what happens to women who fall. You've heard their names spoken in hushed tones, their fates sealed in stories that always end with isolation, disgrace, or the cold edge of a blade. One woman, you're told, was sewn into a sack and tossed into the river. Another disappeared during a trip to the mountains, her body never found, her name struck from the family records. The message is always the same: do not stray, not even with your thoughts. And yet your thoughts stray anyway. It begins with a man who's not your husband, a junior officer in your husband's retinue, maybe, or a visiting poet attached to a noble house. Someone clean and careful, younger perhaps, or simply more attentive. You don't even notice him at first. He bows. He says what is proper. He keeps his eyes respectfully lowered. But then one day he looks up and your gaze meets his just a moment too long. It's nothing until it's not. After that, every glance feels weighted. Every shared space becomes a test. He passes by in the garden, and you become hyper-aware of the way your sleeve brushes your wrist. You offer tea at a gathering, and his fingertips graze yours for the briefest second. You both flinch, but neither of you pulls away fast enough. You tell yourself it's harmless, you're not sneaking away, you're not writing poems in secret or exchanging trysts in the moonlight. You're simply enjoying the idea that someone sees you, that someone might want you, not out of obligation but desire. It's a dangerous pleasure. But it's also the first thing that's felt alive in years. You start walking the long way to the shrine. You adjust your hair with more care. You wear your softer sandals, the ones that make your step quieter, lighter. You know this can't go anywhere. You know the walls around your world are too thick, too well guarded. But you start to imagine what it would be like, just for a night, just once, to be touched by someone who asked first. Of course someone notices. They always do. A maid with nothing better to do, a cousin too eager to prove her usefulness. A jealous wife who's seen one too many glances passed across the dinner mat. You hear the whisper before you even see who said it. She smiles when he enters the room. That's all it takes. The weight of that sentence is crushing because it's not just a comment, it's an accusation. A prophecy, a ticking clock. You become more careful, you stop passing through the garden at the same time. You begin answering only when spoken to. Your robes grow more muted. You even avoid his eyes, though doing so hurts more than you'd expected. But the distance doesn't help. The whisper has already spread, curling through the halls like smoke. Even silence can't stop it now. Your mother-in-law calls you in for tea. She doesn't mention his name. She doesn't need her to. Instead, she speaks of a woman she once knew, a lady of another house who became too close to a monk. She lost everything, she says. Her child, her name, her peace. She stirs her tea slowly, deliberately. Be cautious, daughter. The wind may feel warm, but it can still carry fire. You nod. You bow. You do not defend yourself. There's nothing to confess, but nothing to deny either. The next time you see him, he looks different, distant. His bow is deeper. He does not linger. He does not look up. And somehow that hurts even more than if he had turned away in disgust. Because now it's not just a fantasy burned away, it's the proof that it was real. You go through the motions, you play the part, but something in you wilts, not from heartbreak, from the knowledge that desire once tasted can't be forgotten. You've returned to the world of duty, of scripted affection and ceremonial touches. But you've seen the crack in the wall now. You know what's behind it. And even worse, you know it was never yours to keep. Still, you are lucky. Luck, in your world, doesn't mean getting what you want. It means not being destroyed by what you almost had. The whisper dies. Another scandal blooms somewhere else. A maid's affair with a stable boy. A missing jewellery box. The court is always hungry for gossip. You become old news, safe again, boring again. But inside you are not the same. You walk slower, speak less. But when you lie beside your husband at night, you do not go still the way you once did. You think about hands that wanted to touch you, about eyes that held nothing but warmth, about all the words you never said. You become both more cautious and more alive, because now you know. A forbidden affair doesn't need to be consummated to be dangerous. Sometimes it's more powerful when it's only imagined, when it remains suspended in that fragile space between wanting and losing, between almost and never. And from that point forward, you carry the truth in your bones. You are not immune. No woman is, but you are also not afraid. Because even a whisper of desire is enough to remind you that you're still human under all the ceremony. Still flesh, still worthy, and still capable of feeling something more than duty, even if it nearly ruined you. You receive the summons in the late morning, tucked neatly into a folded letter, and delivered by a page with eyes too wide for the job. The paper is perfumed lightly with plum oil, the calligraphy deliberate, elegant but firm. It's an invitation to serve at court. Not full-time, of course, just an extended seasonal visit to your husband's daimyo, who's requested the presence of distinguished wives of excellent standing to grace the residence during the New Year ceremonies. You already know what that means. It's a test, not of loyalty, those are constant, but of performance. Court life is a different game. No diapers, no rice ledgers, no crying babies or colicky nights. Here the rules are invisible, but they cut sharper than any katana. The women are adorned like lacquer boxes, layered in meanings as thick as their robes. One wrong gesture, one poorly chosen phrase, and you'll be remembered not as charming, but foolish. It is social warfare under a silk canopy. Still you accept. The preparations begin immediately. You're fitted for your best formal kimono, the one with cranes embroidered in flight and a sash that takes 3 servants to tie. You practice calligraphy again, rehearse new poetry, revise your knowledge of incense combinations. You refresh your knowledge of court gossip, who's pregnant, who's not, who's been seen limping mysteriously after last month's festival. The palace is dazzling even to someone who's not easily impressed. Gold-lined screens, fresh ikebana arrangements in every corridor, and attendants that move like smoke. You are shown to your chambers, where everything smells faintly of sandalwood and caution. There are 5 other wives already stationed at court when you arrive, all from different districts, all the type who smile without revealing their teeth. Within an hour you've been weighed and measured, not physically, but socially. One wife compliments your sash while touching her own. Another says your handwriting is full of character, which sounds nice until you realize she means a bit messy. You do not bite back. You smile. That's how you win here. Court is not about sex, not directly, but it hovers underneath everything like steam in the bathhouse. The way the men's eyes linger on the backs of necks, the way the younger wives laugh at jokes that are more suggestive than clever, the way compliments are given sideways, you carry yourself with such balance, meaning I've noticed your hips. Everyone speaks in code. The real conversations are hidden beneath fans and over shared cups of sake. Flirtation is currency, not because it leads anywhere, but because it means you're being watched. Being watched means being remembered, and in a world where memory equals status, you learn to perform attentiveness without attachment. You begin to master the flirtation game, just enough laugh, just enough stillness, the right amount of eye contact before looking away, never too eager, never too cold. One man, a senior advisor barely older than your father, becomes unusually persistent. He praises your poetry, he asks about your son. He lingers too long in the conversation circle. You respond with the same grace you always do, polite, neutral, and when needed, distant. He gets the message eventually, but you can feel the eyes on you afterward. You've just proven you know how to draw a line. You gain points for it. But some women cross the line deliberately. That's part of the game too. You watch one evening as a younger wife, the 4th daughter of a minor noble, leans just slightly too close to the daimyo during a sack ceremony. Her laugh is perfect. Her collar dips strategically. Everyone sees it. No one reacts, not outwardly, but the next day she's moved to a lesser room. A message disguised as a change of scenery. You don't see her again for 2 weeks. That's how fast it turns. At night, the court is quieter, but not restful. There are musical performances, incense competitions, whispered games of Go that stretch into the dark hours. Everyone stays up later than they should, their minds sharp and their faces placid. You find yourself watching the other wives more than the men. The real power here isn't held by the daimyo or the retainers, or even the senior advisors. It's held by the women who know how to survive in these silk cages, who know how to say just enough and never more. One woman, older than the rest, becomes a quiet ally. She never gossips, never flatters, but when she speaks, the room stills. She tells you once, while walking through the moon garden, the best way to be desired is to appear unattainable, but the best way to hold power is to be underestimated. You write that down later in your brush notebook, tucking the page beneath a layer of cedar to preserve it. In time, you begin to enjoy court more than you expected. Not for the glitter or the praise, but for the discipline. You've always been good at endurance. Here, you use it like a blade. You smile when you want to scream. You drink tea when you'd rather throw it. You play the game because now you know how. But there are moments when you miss the simpler humiliations of home, the baby's hand gripping your finger, the comfort of routine, the exhaustion that didn't come from strategy. Here, every emotion is folded and hidden like a message in a kimono sleeve. Still, when the daimyo praises your ikebana arrangement in front of the entire court, you feel something shift. Your husband isn't even present for it. That makes it sweeter. The acknowledgement is yours alone. Your choice of plum and pine and winter chrysanthemum. Your composition, your touch. You are no longer just someone's wife, you're someone in your own right. You return home a month later with more gifts than you brought, and a new gleam in your step that your mother-in-law notices instantly. She says nothing, just nods slightly when you bow, but the message is clear. You went to court, you survived, and next time you'll return not just to represent your husband, but yourself. The first time someone slides a shunga scroll into your hands, it happens like a secret being passed in a crime. You're sitting in the corner of the women's quarters during the rainy season, the sound of dripping water tapping against the wooden eaves above, when one of the younger wives leans over and slips a small roll of rice paper under your folded robe. She doesn't speak, doesn't look at you, just rises and walks out with a cup of tea in hand, her expression unreadable. You wait until the corridor empties. Then quietly you pull the scroll into your lap, unrolling it as slowly as if it were booby-trapped. The ink is faded in places, but the scene is unmistakable. Two figures tangled together in an embrace too vivid to misinterpret. There is no subtlety here, no delicate allusions or poetic metaphors. This is not Heian poetry or temple scripture. This is raw, carnal, and completely unashamed. You've seen depictions before, usually in more refined forms, buried in the margins of educational texts or hinted at in kabuki plays. But this is different. The detail is meticulous. The lovers' bodies are exaggerated, yes, as shunga often is, but the emotion captured in their faces feels more honest than anything you've read in a marriage scroll. There's laughter. There's intensity. There's pleasure. It shocks you. Not because of what's shown, but because of what you feel. Not shame, not disgust, but curiosity. The kind that burns slowly and stays lit even after you roll the paper back up and hide it beneath your sleeves. That night, you can't sleep. You lie awake in your futon, staring at the ceiling, hearing the rain trickling down the roof tiles, and you wonder, what would it be like to be touched that way? Not dutifully, not predictably, but passionately? What would it feel like to laugh during intimacy instead of holding your breath, waiting for it to end? The next morning you find another scroll, this time left deliberately on your pillow while you're in the bath. This one is even more daring. Multiple figures, different positions, expressions so alive they feel like whispers on the back of your neck. It's both a joke and an invitation, not for action, but for thought. And it works, because now you start seeing signs of shunga everywhere. Not the pictures themselves, those remain hidden in corners and drawers and at the bottom of kimono chests, but their echoes. The sly smile one wife gives another during calligraphy practice. The way an older woman casually refers to her night pillow and raises her eyebrows slightly. The courtesan poetry you once dismissed as vulgar now seems like survival disguised as sensuality. You realize slowly that these scrolls are not just erotica, they're rebellion. They are documentation of desire in a society that demands women only receive, never want. And the women, well, they know. They all know. Some have whole collections, kept behind false panels or tucked into folding fans. Others share stories about artists who specialize in this kind of work. Men who visit high-ranking wives, listen to their whispered fantasies, and draw their commissions in exchange for rice, gold, or secrets. You find out that your mother-in-law once posed for such a drawing. She admits it over tea, half daring you to react. You don't. Instead, you ask what she wore. Nothing, she replies. That was the point. She doesn't smile, she doesn't explain, she just sips her tea and stares into the middle distance. like she's remembering something with equal parts fondness and regret. You begin to understand that Shunga is not just about sex. It's about ownership of your body, your curiosity, your voice. Even the act of looking is power reclaimed. You spend your entire life being looked at, judged, compared, expected to perform. But now, for the first time, you are the one observing. Choosing what you see, imagining what it might feel like. There's debate, of course. Some call it filth. Others say it distracts women from their proper duties. Some claim it encourages indecency. But privately, even the most stoic of wives admit they've peaked at one or two, that they've imagined, that they felt their own skin react in ways they weren't taught to expect. You start sketching in your notebook. Nothing graphic, just suggestions. Eyes half lowered, lips parted, hands not quite touching. You don't show anyone. But the act of drawing itself becomes a kind of confession. And somehow it helps. You feel less alone in your desires, less broken. One scroll in particular stays with you. It shows a woman on top, her body arched, her hair loose and wild. Her face is not serene or silent. It's alive, she's in control, and her partner looks helpless beneath her, not in pain but in awe. You stare at that image for longer than you probably should. Later that evening, your husband comes to you. You don't close your eyes this time. You don't lie still. You move your hand to his wrist, guide him without words, just enough to shift the rhythm. He raises an eyebrow, surprised, but doesn't resist. It's not a revolution. It's a ripple. But it's yours. And afterward, for the first time, you feel different. Not because it was good, though it wasn't bad, but because you were present for it. Not a shell, not a mirror, a woman. The next morning you burn the sketch, and not out of shame, but because you've memorized it now. You don't need the ink. It lives behind your eyes. And maybe that's what Shunga really is. A mirror, a myth, a reminder that you are more than a role. You're a body, you're a pulse, you're a secret someone forgot to keep. It starts with your sister, the quiet one, the one who always did as she was told, always bowed a little too deeply, always spoke with a voice so gentle it barely stirred the air. She visits during the harvest festival, carrying Aag's gifts wrapped in embroidered cloth, pickled plums, rice crackers, a woven doll for your son, and something else you can't quite name, a lightness in her step, a brightness behind her eyes. It takes you 3 days to realize what's changed. She's not the same. One afternoon, while your son naps and the house is still, you sit together on the veranda sipping barley tea, your sleeves brushing as the wind picks up just enough to rattle the lanterns. Your sister reaches into her sleeve and pulls out a small packet of incense, the kind used at temples. She places it in your palm without explanation. "From someone I trust," she says. You raise your eyebrows. She only smiles. That night, while bathing, you unroll the packet and inhale the scent. Lavender, cinnamon, and something darker, almost resinous. It smells like secrets. You sit in the water longer than usual, letting the heat swirl around your body as the aroma settles in your lungs. The next day you press her. "Where did you get this?" you ask, knowing already it's not from any merchant in your province. She waits until the servants leave. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she tells you the truth. She's been spending time at a temple. You nod, expecting something harmless. Charity work, religious meditation, maybe a new interest in calligraphy. But no, she leans in, eyes scanning the walls as if they could hear her, and says, "There's someone, a monk." The silence between you is deafening. You stare at her, stunned, not by the act itself, but by the way she says it. Not ashamed, not scared, but with that same calm light you've been trying to name since her arrival. She tells you about him in pieces. He's younger than expected, thoughtful. He listens. He doesn't treat her like a ghost wrapped in silk. She met him at a prayer service of all places. At first, they spoke about incense, then scripture, then not long after, about everything else. You want to ask, how did it begin? What did it feel like the first time his fingers touched yours? Were you afraid? Was it worth it? But all you say is, "You could be ruined." She nods, unsurprised. "I know, but I've never felt more like myself." You don't sleep that night, not because you're judging her, but because you're envious, deeply, bone-deep envious of the kind of clarity she wears now like a second skin. She's still careful, still gentle, still the same sister who used to cry when you snuck out of lessons, but now she knows something you don't, something real. And it makes you think. You start paying attention to the temple near your estate, a modest place, barely maintained, home to a rotating group of monks who tend to the land and conduct blessings during seasonal rites. You've always treated it like a formality, attending when you must, bowing politely, offering coin. But now you look closer. There's one monk in particular, young, with a face carved like riverstone and a voice that always seems half-formed, as though he's still choosing his words. He never speaks directly to you. He looks at your husband, at your child, never at you, until he does. It happens during a festival, when he hands you a small offering of sake blessed for fertility. His fingers brush yours for only a second, but your heart thuds against your ribs like a drum. He doesn't flinch, he doesn't linger. He simply meets your gaze, just for a breath, and then moves on. You tell yourself it was nothing, but nothing has a way of growing. You begin to understand how these stories start, not with scandal, not with lust, but with hunger. A hunger for kindness, for recognition, for the sensation of being known beyond the shape of your role. And the temples, so full of incense and quiet and shadow, become the perfect places for that hunger to bloom. The older wives talk about it in riddles. They warn each other against too much worship. One tells a story of a woman who prayed every day at a remote temple until she left with something more than spiritual insight. Another clutches her prayer beads and mutters that monks should remain behind their gates, like animals in a garden. But the walls between sacred and profane are thinner than they look. You don't act on anything. You never visit the monk outside of festivals. You never speak his name. But you feel it now, that latent possibility in every bow, every glance. You feel the ache that lives somewhere between reverence and desire, the part of you that wants to be seen and not judged, touched, not owned. And you begin to understand your sister in a way you never could before. When she leaves, she hugs you longer than usual. She whispers, "Take care of yourself." And you know what she means? Not just your body, your soul, yourself. The part of you no one else is looking after. You tuck her incense into a drawer. You light it sometimes when the house is still and the child is asleep. You let the scent carry you to the edge of temptation, not to act, but to remember that the choice could exist. That desire isn't always destruction. Sometimes it's a signal that you're still alive under all that silk. And in the quiet that follows, you make a promise to yourself. Not to chase after love, not to burn down your life, but to hold on to the parts of you that still dream. Even if it's only in the scent of smoke rising from a small wooden box. Even if it's only in your sister's smile. Even if it's only in the part of your soul that bows at the temple, not to the Buddha, but to the version of you who wants. They call you war widow now, though no one has officially said the words. There's been no letter, no messenger with tearful eyes, or a head bowed too long. Just silence. And in samurai households, silence is a blade in silk. Weeks have passed since your husband last sent word, and already the household has begun to shift in the quiet, instinctive ways it does when a man disappears into smoke and a memory. The servants start whispering more cautiously. Your mother-in-law lights incense twice as often. Even your son, too young to understand death, has stopped asking when father will come back. You don't cry, not at first. Instead, you fold everything tighter. Your emotions, your robes, your schedule. You stop visiting the koi pond. You stop writing poems. You host guests with perfect smiles. You accept condolences that haven't even been spoken aloud. The moment a soldier vanishes, his wife becomes an image. You're no longer a woman. You're a symbol of endurance wrapped in indigo and obligation. But inside, you are not just grieving a man. You're grieving the part of yourself that was built around him. He wasn't perfect. He wasn't even particularly kind, but he was yours, in the way a woman is told to build her life around a man, like planting a tree whose shade you might never get to sit beneath. Now the tree has fallen and everyone expects you to keep raking the leaves. With no official confirmation of death, you remain in limbo. Technically still married, technically still tethered. You cannot remarry, cannot change your status, cannot even move from the inner household without approval from the head family. You're both bound and abandoned. And yet oddly you feel something loosen. For the first time in years, your chamber is truly your own. No footsteps outside your door after dinner. No scheduled visits, no perfumed obligation. You sleep in the middle of the futon instead of curled to one side. You let your hair down more often. You speak a little louder. When the steward questions one of your budget decisions, You answer with a firmness that surprises even yourself. At first, the other women flinch, but then, slowly, they begin deferring to ye, not because they must, but because you've begun carrying yourself like someone who no longer seeks permission. And that, in the world of silence and structure, is its own kind of power. You start visiting the storerooms, you review rice inventories, you walk the grounds with the overseer. Your voice, once used mostly for ceremony and lullabies, becomes something sharp and steady. You are still grieving, but grief, it turns out, makes an excellent mask. The other widows begin to seek you out. There are more than you realized. They emerge from behind screens and garden paths, dressed in modest greys and deep blues. You recognize the look in their eyes, the mix of loss and opportunity. For so long they were expected to simply fade. Now they've learned to lean in. One widow, older than you by 20 years, tells you over tea, once they're gone, they stop being real. What remains is what you choose to keep. You nod, understanding more than you say, because in truth you've been keeping less and less. You've stopped saying your husband's name, you've stopped polishing his armour. You've packed away the scrolls he favoured, tucked his writing box into a drawer. You mourn him, but quietly, with distance, the way one mourns an idea that never quite became what it promised. You begin to write again. Not poetry, not letters. You write records, notes, instructions. You begin creating a household guide, part journal, part handbook for your son. For the day when he inherits this place and must learn that running a samurai household is less about warfare and more about knowing which old women to listen to. You tell yourself it's for him, but part of it's for you. A way to narrate your own life, even if no one ever reads it. You attend ceremonies alone now. You light incense for your husband's spirit, even though no funeral has been held. You kneel, bow, and recite the proper prayers, but your heart drifts elsewhere, not to him, but to the sound of your son's laughter in the garden, to the smell of ginger rice cooking in the kitchen, to the quiet thrill of knowing that for the first time you are at the centre of your own life. And then, just when you've begun to settle into this unexpected shape, the letter arrives. He's alive, wounded but alive, recovering at a distant outpost, delayed by weather and infection and the slow-moving wheels of military correspondence. He will return in a month. You reread the letter 3 times. Your hands shake, your heart doesn't know what to do. There is no joy, not the way you thought there might be. Just confusion, disruption. He is alive, and that changes everything. The household buzzes with news. The women begin preparations. His room is cleaned, his armour polished, his favourites prepared. And you, what do? You sit in your chamber that night, staring at the wall, trying to picture him walking back through the gate. You try to imagine what your face will do. You try to imagine what your body will feel. You don't know, because the truth is, you buried him, not physically but emotionally. You wrapped that chapter in cloth, stored it with the ceremonial items, and began to live again. Not loudly, not scandalously, but fully. You learned how to command, how to protect, how to belong to yourself. Now he's coming back. And though you won't say it aloud, part of you is mourning all over again. Not for him, but for the version of you that only existed in his absence. When he returns, it's just after dawn. You hear the wheels of the cart before you see him, wood creaking softly over stone, followed by the light tread of his retainers and the rustle of robes you know by heart. You don't run to greet him. That would be unseemly. You don't wait inside either. That would be cold. You stand just beyond the veranda, spine straight, palms folded, your breath a slow, practiced thing. You've spent weeks preparing for this moment, but now that it's here, you feel nothing but a strange and echoing stillness. He steps down slowly, leaning heavier on his attendant than you remember. He's thinner. His hair is greyer at the temples. There's a long scar along his jaw you've never seen before. His eyes sweep over the courtyard and land on you. You bow, low and formal, not deeply, not emotionally. You're a wife, not a widow, not yet. He returns the bow, briefer, tighter. Pain restricts his movement. Or maybe it's something else. The first thing he says is not, "I missed you." Not, "I'm glad to see you well." It's, "Has the child grown tall?" You blink and smile. "Yes," you say. He stands taller than the brush rack now. It's the right answer. It's the expected one. And just like that, the moment is complete. The ritual is satisfied. The story continues. But something has shifted. The household adjusts quickly. His presence reasserts itself like a lantern relit after a long night, warm but intrusive. The quiet you grew used to is gone. Men march through the halls again. Decisions that were yours revert without a word. The ledgers you managed are returned to the steward. You're consulted on dinners, but not accounts. At night he returns to your chambers, slowly, awkwardly. The wound in his leg prevents him from kneeling easily. He does not apologize for his absence. He does not ask what you felt when you thought he might be dead. He does not ask what changed, but he notices. He watches you as if trying to read a scroll that has been partially rewritten in his absence. You move with more confidence now. You speak more directly. You look him in the eyes more than you used to. He doesn't mention it, but you see it in the way his brow furrows when you finish his sentence before he does. Your son, now old enough to carry a practice sword, approaches him with reverence. The reunion is warm but formal. Your husband corrects his stance, praises his discipline, and reminds him that a true samurai does not speak before being addressed. You watch this exchange from behind the shoji screen, a knot in your chest that isn't pride or relief, just distance. You wonder if your child notices it too. That night, after the baby has been put to bed, your husband enters your room. He sits across from you, his posture stiff, and says, "I hear the household ran smoothly." You nod. "I did what was required." He studies you. "You've changed." You want to laugh? Of course you've changed. You carried the household like a banner while everyone waited for word of your death. You grieved. You wrote. You led. You found your voice and used it like a blade, but all you say is, "Yes." He touches your hand then, and for a moment the gesture is almost tender. Almost. But then he says, "I'm glad the house is still in order." And just like that, the tenderness is gone. Your hand feels like porcelain in his grip, something to admire, not to know. In the following weeks, he attempts to return to routine. He expects the household to revert around him, like a tide called back by the moon. But tides don't forget the shorelines they've shaped in absence, and you don't forget the freedom that tasted like your own breath. You remain obedient in the ways that matter. You pour his tea, you host his guests, you attend to the shrine and recite the family prayers. But you don't ask for his opinion before making changes to the nursery. You don't ask before directing the gardener to replant the iris beds. You no longer shrink from his presence, and that unsettles him more than open defiance ever could. One evening after dinner, he says, "The child should start sword training more seriously. He must learn loyalty." You pause, then reply, "He already has." Your tone is soft, not defiant, not sharp, but firm. It silences the room more effectively than any raised voice. He doesn't respond, but you both feel it. You have not been unfaithful, you have not rebelled, but you have grown, and he doesn't know what to do with a wife who has grown in his absence. One night, as you lie awake beside him, your body still, your mind churning, you realize something. You do not miss who you were before he left, and you do not want to return to her. But now you must become something else. Not just a wife who remembers how to run the house, a woman who doesn't forget. You begin to teach your son things his father won't. About observation, about restraint, about how real strength often lives in quiet decisions made behind paper walls. You tell him stories not about warriors, but about wise women, clever foxes, and bamboo that bends but does not break. You speak in layers. You trust that he will one day understand. You also begin mentoring a younger wife in the household, one who looks at you the way you once looked at your own mother-in-law, with a mixture of reverence and fear. You teach her the quiet strategies, the folding fan pages, the art of smiling just enough. You don't tell her everything, but you tell her enough. And slowly the household begins to shift again, not back to what it was, but forward into something new, something shaped by your presence, your choices, your voice. Your husband remains the head of the house, but you are now its spine. It's not until years later, long after your son has grown tall enough to carry his own sword, long after your husband's limp has become permanent, long after your hair begins to silver, that you begin to truly understand how many rules you've lived by without ever seeing them written down. They were never posted on scrolls or inked into family ledgers. No one read them aloud at your wedding, and yet they've governed every movement of your life. These are the hidden rules, the ones women learn in glances and pauses, through stories unfinished and phrases carefully chosen. They are ancient, invisible, and enforced with precision sharper than steel. You notice them now more than ever, because now you're the one expected to enforce them. A new wife joins the household, a young girl, barely past womanhood, brought in to marry your nephew. She's bright-eyed, clumsy, eager to please. She spills tea